Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name's George Mulderbarrow. I'm recently appointed chair of the New South Wales division of ATSE, and I have to apologise a little bit in advance in that my notes say that my name's Anne Green, and clearly I'm not Anne Green. So I've sort of come to this realisation that I'm actually chairing this only now. So you forgive me for any slip-ups on the way. And it's my fault, of course. I've been travelling overseas and haven't kept up with correspondence. So this is actually a very special one of our lunches that we have in the partnership between the club and ATSE with prominent guest speakers. But today's we have Professor Barney Glover, and the title of his speech is Ahead of the Curve, Addressing Meaningful Change. But this is not just a normal event for us. It's the Chaikin Oration, which has its own special meaning, and I'll come to that in a minute. So in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, in particular the Gadigal people on the Eora Nation, on whose land we're sitting today in the in-person part of proceedings, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We're joined today by fellows of the Academy, as I mentioned, and the members of the Union University and Schools Club. There's a bit of a mouthful, that title, but here we go. I would have thought it should be better off being the Sydney Club, but as we are gathered as friends, collaborators and partners here in person at the club and also online across Australia. And I say welcome to everybody, whether they're online or here. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge three members of the Chaikin family, Catriona Chaikin, Elizabeth Chaikin and Associate Professor David Chaikin. ATSE is a learned academy of independent experts, and our fellows are among Australia's leaders in applied science, technology and engineering. They come together to provide impartial, practical and evidence-based advice on how to achieve sustainable solutions and invest and promote prosperity in our society. Our eminent speaker today is recognised for his influential leadership on scientific advocacy and advancing these goals, particularly in the education sphere. The technical organisation of this event is via the Secretariat of ATSE and as well as the Union Club's administration, and I'd like to thank everyone for their assistance in putting on the event. There will be, after Professor Glover's speech, there'll be ample time for discussion, the Q&A, and so you might store up questions during Professor Glover's speech. Bathrooms are downstairs in terms of administrative issues. In the unlikely event of an emergency, please use the stairs and don't use the lift. So as I mentioned, today's event's very special. It's our annual event in honour of the lifetime contributions of Professor Malcolm Chaikin, AO, OBE, FTSE, for science, technology, education and philanthropy. And it's a great, as I mentioned before, it's a pleasure to mention members of the Chaikin family. The Chaikin Oration was inaugurated as an event in 2012 by the New South Wales division of ATSE to honour this man's achievements. He was born in China, arrived in Australia with his refugee parents. Malcolm Chaikin began working for the CSIRO in Australia following an education in the UK. He then became the youngest professor in Australia, then at age 31. He was appointed to the Foundation Chair of Textile Technology at the New South Wales University of Technology. He held many senior administrative positions at UNSW, including as inaugural Pro-VC Research and International, and created their IP company Unisearch. He's been an outstanding researcher in the field of textile engineering and membrane technology, holding some 30 patents. His work's also renowned in areas of recycling, waste management, water research and desalination, and he's influential in many fields. And passionate about sport, dancing, education and philanthropy. He was awarded many prizes and accolades, and in turn generously established many prizes and scholarships to support students. The Malcolm Chaikin Oration is presented annually by an outstanding technologist and educator who has contributed to society in the Chaikin tradition. Chaikin Medal is presented to the Orator as a vote of thanks on behalf of the New South Wales Division, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's recipient to present the medal to Professor Barney Glover, Vice-Chancellor of Western Sydney University. Professor Glover assumed his position as Vice-Chancellor and President of Western Sydney University in January 2014. He's a distinguished academic leader, an accomplished mathematician and mathematics educator, like the former Vice-Chancellor of Sydney University. So Professor Glover leads Western Sydney University as it continues to strive to ensure its students will succeed, its research will have impact, and its communities will thrive in Western Sydney and beyond. In January 2019, Professor Glover was appointed as an Officer of the Order of Australia for distinguished service to tertiary education, to professional associations and to cultural organisations. He's strongly connected to industry and the private sector. So, without further comments from me, I'd like to introduce Professor Glover to give the Chaikin Oration. I thought I'd give the medal after he speaks.
Yes, best to keep the medal till afterwards, make sure things work out over the course of the next half an hour. But thank you for those introductory comments. Excuse me, it is great to be here. I am incredibly honoured to deliver the 2022 Chaikin Oration. I want to thank the New South Wales Division of the Academy for the invitation, and I'd like to particularly thank Anne Green and colleagues for supporting this event today, and wonderful to see so many of you here. I want to particularly acknowledge the members of the Chaikin family. We're here today, and it was great to have a quick chat to David, Katrina and Liz a little earlier, so great to see you and to actually have an opportunity to correct some of my misunderstandings of some of the history of Malcolm Chaikin, so that was great. As I'll discuss a little later in my address, Professor Malcolm Chaikin's life is eminently worthy of recognition, and I hope I can do it justice today. It deserves to be a continuing source of pride for all associated with his personal and professional legacy. But I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, elders past, present and emerging. The first Australians are custodians of the longest continuing tradition of technology and engineering on the planet, and we must commit to deeper recognition and promotion of that remarkable scientific canon. The next 12 months in particular will be so important as this country moves, I hope, towards constitutional recognition and an Indigenous voice to Parliament. In my talk today, I want to explore the theme of commitment, particularly in the context of scientific and technological collaboration. I seek to emphasise its centrality, not just to scientific endeavour, but life more broadly. Before I do that, however, I must pay my respects to an individual who exemplified those values so deeply at every level. One of the Academy's most treasured fellows, Emeritus Professor Robin King, and his wife Penny passed in a tragic accident in July this year. Robin's passing as we know, is a great loss to Australia's engineering and scientific community. Robin was a committed and inspirational colleague and widely acknowledged globally as a leading light in the field of engineering and engineering education. He was also a selfless volunteer and generous scholar, dedicating countless hours to the promotion of social good and purpose in engineering. Speaking to Engineers Australia about his motivations, Robin said, and I quote, "I have a firm belief in engineering being about making continuous improvements to meet the future requirements of society. If we can, through volunteering, improve the quality of engineering practice, then it's marvellous. We're giving back." Vale Robin King. His passion has a synergy with that of Professor Chaikin. That alignment is a reminder for all of us of the importance of foregrounding positive socioeconomic transformation and community impact through technology and education. Both scholars are proof that none of their achievements are possible without celebrating the true purpose of the scholarship they championed. It was Robin who reached out to me regarding the great honour of giving this oration. And as always, it was a call I took because to ignore Robin was perilous, to say the least. He'll be missed, as many of us understood at the recent commemoration of his life at Engineers Australia here in Sydney. As previous Chaikin orators have illustrated, among them Dr. Cathy Foley, just earlier this year, Catherine Livingston AO, Professor Mary O'Kane, a great friend, AC, and Professor Alan Finkel AO, technology and engineering are human disciplines. They are pursuits concerned with solving human problems. We must never forget that. In fact, we should be inspired by that truth. I must confess to being a mathematician with an interest in optimisation, an area of applied mathematics that intersects with and to a certain extent transcends science, engineering and economics, and is clearly a human discipline in much the same way. Professor Chaikin was a figure steeped in transformation. Born in Shanghai in 1923 to parents originally from Ukraine, he was educated in England before arriving in Australia with his refugee parents in 1953, and of course after education in the UK. Given the eventual trajectory of his scientific career, it's clear his early conventional education provided an important foundation. But the most salient clues to his extraordinary capacity for innovation are, I think, found in other pursuits. As a teenager, he became an amateur boxing champion and jockey no less. His greatest love, reportedly, was dancing, and he was at one point the Shanghai Jitterbug champion. During the Second World War, under Japanese occupation, he and his family, not interned because they were displaced persons, stateless persons, smuggled food into Shanghai concentration camps. In Australia, Chaikin's stellar and well-documented scientific career was augmented by similarly diverse pursuits. He served for over a decade as the chair of the National Institute of Dramatic Art, NIDA. Concurrent to his presidency of the Benevolent Society of New South Wales. I'm particularly attracted to his support for the arts, given my own involvement for 5 years, supporting the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences, the Powerhouse, and its transition to an extraordinary science and technology focus in Parramatta in 2024, something we should all look forward to. Chaikin's story, his embrace of sports, the arts and social justice, illustrates the importance of individuals looking beyond linear objectives. It proves how by expanding the range of our experiences, we bring greater focus to our core endeavours. In Malcolm's case, his well-rounded background fueled his pioneering work in industrial waste management, recycling and desalination, beginning in textile engineering. There's a lesson for universities in Chaikin's approach, one that might seem to contradict the structures on which our institutions are based. Universities are places of deep expertise, places where in-depth knowledge of a particular discipline is rightfully prized. Disciplinarity, by its nature, does not always encourage us to venture too far beyond our chosen field. Many of the best researchers, however, challenge that approach. In engineering, that's evident wherever technological solutions are born of social and at times almost existential challenges. This rationale likely drove Chaikin's contribution to the establishment of the Werribee Centre for Sustainable Water Use. And it's evident, I think, in his initiation of the Australia-Israel exchange programs. His related work in arid zone research and his expansive collaborations in water science were certainly born of human experiences with these issues. I'm reminded of my own experiences on the boards of two related cooperative research centres in this country, in arid land management and water. And it reminded me, as I read about Malcolm Chaikin, that the latter, the CRC for Water, was chaired for many years by another pioneer of Australian science and technology, the late Emeritus Professor Nancy Millis, in her case, in fermentation science. Chaikin and Millis were ahead of the curve. Universities need to seize the opportunity to be ahead of the curve and fulfil the ambitions of the communities that they serve. The challenges our societies are facing demand innovation across discipline boundaries and new drivers and incentives for collaboration. My own institution, Western Sydney University, champions the same approach. We were honoured this year to be named the #1 university globally in the Times Higher Education rankings for our social and ecological impact. Based on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the ranking reflects expertise in foci ranging from environmental sustainability through to gender equity. Critically, partnerships and collaboration are highly valued, linked through SDG 17. For Western Sydney University, this means that our scientific expertise must be balanced with social and ecological considerations. Above all, we're committed to applying these values where the need is greatest. The MAVI initiative is an example of that approach. Funded by the Australian Water Partnership and the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, MAVI is focused, as the acronym suggests, on managing aquifer recharge and sustaining groundwater use through village-level intervention. Western Sydney University, CSIRO and others collaborate on the program, which is focused on rural communities in India, specifically in the districts of Gujarat and Rajasthan. Both districts are in hard rock aquifer areas. They present complex and difficult problems, complicated by socioeconomic disadvantage and a range of other barriers, including cultural. They are difficult propositions, but they are precisely the right places to focus our efforts because they involve both human and technology challenges. At present, over 20,000 villages are involved in the program, demonstrating impact at scale in India. To succeed, MAVI requires a transdisciplinary approach to research. This is not about collaboration for its own sake, but rather collaboration as an essential exercise in realising social good. The empowerment of women within the villages as data collectors and reporters on the health of the aquifer is just one of the societal benefits of the MAVI project. These same values are driving Western Sydney University's partnership in the Himalayan University Consortium, along with over 75 other global partners. The consortium is focused on strengthening joint research and knowledge capacity in the region, a region whose fragile water resources support over 1.9 billion people. This consortium is actively supporting innovative policy solutions to the ecological and humanitarian challenges across the Hindu Kush Himalayas. These initiatives complement additional collaborations with Nepali-based researchers via a program ratified in 2016. By way of example, a recent co-authored project funded by the Australian Embassy in Nepal examines the efficacy of capacity building for Nepali not-for-profit organisations via a reciprocal student exchange program in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. These are the kind of challenges we must seek out if we're to make good on Chaikin's legacy. Initiatives like MAVI and the Himalayan Consortium are vitally important. But we must not confine that ethos to the project level. We should also look to elevate these approaches to an institutional level. Universities must be prepared to look beyond our walls. We must embrace collaboration in new ways and be open to differing perspectives on common goals. For universities, even in the context of increased competition across the sector, of which there is significant increased competition, collaboration must remain a priority. Naturally, such an approach is not without its challenges, with the risks involved requiring both acumen and fortitude to navigate. Competitive tensions aside, the greatest risk in collaborative settings is not acting. This risk is most pronounced in areas where the challenge is greatest. In my own setting of Western Sydney, we contend with both enormous opportunity and risk. The opportunity is squarely centred on the region's growth. It's the fastest growing and most diverse region in Australia. That trend brings the promise of greater prosperity, equity, and dynamism. Realising that promise, however, requires reciprocal capacity. Universities are built for regions like Western Sydney. As agents of transformation, we're institutions that thrive in circumstances of rapid change and renewal. As educators, we're adapting and moving faster than ever. And on occasion, we're ahead of shifts in government policy. And we shouldn't be defeated by that. It's an opportunity for reform. The flow of more than 200,000 graduates through my own university in just over 3 decades has had a demonstrable impact on a region with both above and below average rates of educational attainment. This is particularly significant as Western Sydney is home to the largest First Nations population in urban Australia. That means real change is happening where it's needed most. Despite this, areas of untapped capacity remain. Youth unemployment, for example, in parts of Sydney's west remains higher than 20%. This reaffirms the case for collaboration. To be most effective, it must be done with urgency, with scale, and with a willingness to think outside the box. And I'm convinced universities are up for this. The secret is collaboration doesn't work without purpose. We have a federal minister who said opportunities in life shouldn't, and I quote, depend on your postcode, your parents, or the colour of your skin. Last week, the New South Wales Premier, Dominic Perrottet, formally opened the Parramatta Engineering Innovation Hub. This $320 million facility, developed in partnership with Charter Hall, represents a step change in engineering education and research, and in the way in which we fund critical higher education infrastructure. This year alone, Western Sydney University will open almost $1 billion in new buildings in Parramatta, Westmead and Bankstown. And that wouldn't be possible without new models of collaboration with institutions and private sector corporations. To illustrate the point, the hub brings Western Sydney University and UNSW together in one facility. It enables the cross-pollination of engineering education and research in a highly accessible Parramatta CBD location. We also released the Parramatta 2035 report last week, describing an exciting decadal strategy for Sydney's twin city. I encourage you to have a read. The organisational philosophy and setting of this new facility in Parramatta are significant. Western Sydney is the target of a range of large infrastructure projects, not least of all the coming $1.6 billion Western Sydney Nancy Bird Walton International Airport at Bradfield, a Parramatta light rail network stretching from Westmead to Carlingford and Sydney Olympic Park, new metro links to Westmead and hopefully the airport, and the $1 billion powerhouse Parramatta, the world's most important cultural institution infrastructure project in the world this decade in Western Sydney. Western Sydney is also home to some acute social, economic and climatic changes characteristic of high growth areas experiencing profound change and transformation. Fragile ecosystems, urban heat stress, climate change-induced flooding, and the impacts of a rapidly expanding population. These critical community infrastructure and industry-facing projects must be engaged by a new generation of engineers. The hub at Parramatta is designed to foster that transition. By combining the best elements of our respective programs, Western Sydney University and UNSW are committed to achieving that outcome. While Western Sydney is a natural collaborative focus, the partnership verve in the university sector extends into other areas. Reflective of the push in governments towards meta planning and policy development, a group of 4 universities are working together on wider priorities. The so-called New Alliance comprises the universities of Newcastle and Wollongong, along with UNSW and Western Sydney University. Together, this grouping marshals the energies of over 240,000 students, 18,000 staff across 37 locations, driving more than $1.4 billion in patent research annually. It is truly a powerhouse alliance. The footprint of the Alliance universities is an exact match with a new 6 cities region planning framework the New South Wales government has adopted for Newcastle, Wollongong and Greater Sydney, the 6 cities region. The intention is to provide long-range, consolidated approaches to policy development and planning that enable the more cohesive deployment of resources. It's a setting tailor-made for universities. Accordingly, the New Alliance is committed to pursuing 3 priorities across the 6 cities region, specifically concerned with advancing the cause of women, infrastructure and sustainability. Underpinning all of those priorities is a commitment to First Nations people. The technological sciences and engineering are central to these 3 priorities. Bringing more women into engineering is chief among them. To that end, the New Alliance is pioneering a human-centred program under the working title Engineering Plus. This program will offer hands-on, project-based engineering education informed by academic and industry experts, integrated across the New Alliance universities and TAFE, New South Wales. Engineering Plus will be modular and stackable with multiple entry and exit points. Those are words and concepts that you'll increasingly be used to hearing in educational jargon in the future. Flexible, stackable, modular, just in time. Most importantly, the program will actively seek out and prioritise non-traditional applicants. This includes women, First Nations students, multicultural and mature age students, exactly the people we need to invigorate engineering's distinctly human foundations and technical acumen. With market analysis and a business case completed, we hope to develop and pilot Engineering Plus very soon. Early discussions with state and federal governments have been positive, noting the program's alignment with emerging policies to advance economic participation for women in particular. Should it prove successful, there's every reason to expect we can expand into other scientific and technical disciplines where heightened participation among the targeted cohorts would bring comparable benefits. These are all urgent and deeply important tasks. They go to the heart of the Academy's 21 to 25 strategic objectives. Chief among them, its commitment to foster diversity and excellence in the next generations of scholars. There is every reason to believe that these are more than just mission statements, more than aspirations. If we maintain fidelity to Chaikin's humanist verve, I'm convinced we can achieve our goals and much more. But make no mistake, collaboration is hard. Despite the good intent, the university sector is littered with failed institutional marriages. I won't retrace the reasons for those fractures today, as they're complex and varied, and tragically, I've been involved in many of them. From my own experiences in the sector, I can say, perhaps in Q&A, I can say successful institutional partnerships thrive when all partners have the capacity to look beyond their constituent parts. For universities, this means being able to recognise how we might contribute to larger objectives, how we might apply our highly specialised expertise as part of, rather than the entire solution to a problem or a lone wolf innovator. That approach also allows us to find symbiosis alongside our necessarily competitive instincts. Governments, state and federal, are beginning to recognise the sector's collaborative potential. That understanding permeates initiatives like the Commonwealth's Trailblazer Universities program, designed to boost prioritised research and development and drive commercialisation outcomes with industry partners. The New South Wales Government's Accelerating R&D in New South Wales Action Plan has set a similar platform for university industry collaboration. Importantly, it sets out a framework via which the initiatives it supports have a range of follow-on objectives related to precinct development, open data, relationship development, and small business innovation. This plan comes on the heels of a New South Wales Innovation and Productivity Council report into precincts, which unpacked the role of place-based concentrations of businesses, knowledge-intensive institutions, and entrepreneurs in developing a knowledge-based economy. I'm sure that Malcolm Chaikin would have appreciated this opportunity to bring entrepreneurs together. He was one of our early entrepreneurs. Much of that report has gone on to inform the rolling out of initiatives like the coming Advanced Manufacturing Research Facility with the Western Sydney Aerotropolis. Again, this is a collaborative platform that would not have been possible without the input of university partners working alongside industry and vocational interests to achieve common objectives. Perhaps the most impressive and significant of these developments in New South Wales is the investment of almost $220 million by the state government in the RNA pilot facility. This will be established at Macquarie University and involves the most substantial state-funded R&D program we've ever seen in this state. This project emerged during the pandemic, initiated by a government committed to future-proofing this state and developing a major new knowledge-based job-creating industry sector. The major condition set by the Premier, beyond obviously a compelling business case, but the major condition was simple enough. To get support from the New South Wales government, the universities of New South Wales needed to collaborate and to bring their capability together. This wasn't a moment in the eyes of the Premier for a competitive approach to developing this important new initiative. This approach is being repeated with the AMRF and potentially with the state response to capability building in nuclear science and engineering in partnership with ANSTO. Interesting times ahead. The announcement of the Future Economy Fund in the most recent state budget was part of a $1.4 billion decadal commitment to R&D, commercialisation, industry engagement, and world-leading facilities. This is an investment at a scale we see all too rarely at the Commonwealth level, let alone from a state government. These might, to some extent, and perhaps in comparison to international exemplars, be modest beginnings, but they deserve our support. We're witnessing the emergence of a policy and planning response to research, development, and technological innovation long needed in Australia. Ensuring that ethos survives election cycles and continues to be led by evidence is in all of our interests. That is the continuum of collaboration that I think we can draw from a figure like Chaikin. No set of interests necessarily has primacy over another, just as no single academic discipline eclipses the potential importance of another. In closing, I'm compelled to reflect again on how Chaikin found complexity, compulsion, and commitment in such an eclectic range of pursuits in his own life. Curiosity and intellectualism are common bedfellows. That's clear. But when those traits are so compassionately channeled for the benefit of those most in need, that is something distinctly uncommon. Thank you. Yes.
No, Dick's going to present the medal, isn't he? Okay. Well, gives me great pleasure
Thank
to
you.
present you with the Chaikin medal for the Chaikin Oration. And I'm very appreciative of all the comments research you did about the life of Professor Chaikin. and the anecdotes you told about him. So please accept our.
Thank you very much.
I have to say that sadly, we always relied on Robin King.
I know, I know. We are missing Robin.
Won't do nearly as well. Now.
You want?
Two of us together?
To look as if you're Andy Barney.
Oh, right, yes.
That's very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, Barney, you're not done yet. I'm sure that given the scope and range of the topics you covered, I'm sure there's a lot of questions. But while people are thinking about it, I've got one that I'd like to throw at you. I mean, I was very interested to hear about the engineering hub at Western Sydney University, and in my own profession and particularly in my own field of energy, when you look at the forecasts of requirements, if you like, of industry for engineering graduates, there are increasing shortfalls. As pretty much you look out in the next decade, possibly 2 decades, shortfalls as far as the eye can see. So with your new engineering hub, I'm just curious as to whether you, how you're going with enrolments, and what challenges do you see in making sure that those enrolments start to fill that gap?
Thank you. That is it's a question we should spend a lot of time on, about the challenges in higher education in Australia at the moment and the skills shortages that we're facing now and into the future. And we could look across the spectrum in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and beyond, that we are facing some serious problems. The whole Jobs and Skills Summit was devoted to trying to find ways to address some of those shortcomings. In Australia, we do not have a supply side problem. We have a demand side problem in higher education. We have the capacity in Australia to support increasing numbers of students across the STEM disciplines. But the challenge is we do not see, unfortunately, we don't see the demand for those disciplines. Now, we're in the process of rebuilding our international education programs. That's a critical part of that. And we're certainly looking at ways in which we can find new and innovative engineering and science programs to attract more people into those disciplines. So that's an active consideration for all universities. And without wanting to get too technical about the challenge, right now the new Albanese government is having to undertake a review of higher education. It was a scheduled review of the jobs-ready graduate reforms that were put in place by the previous government under Dan Tehan as the Minister for Education. Now, those reforms are coming to a point at which they're due for review. And this government's committed to undertaking a review of them. But one of the core challenges within this review is the funding of particularly the STEM disciplines in Australia's universities, because it's one thing to be challenged in attracting students into those programs. It's another when the Commonwealth underfunds them. So we have a real challenge in convincing the government through this review process to actually properly fund the STEM disciplines in Australian universities. So that's one issue. Hopefully this process will give us some benefit. Now, you mentioned the Engineering Innovation Hub. I mentioned Engineering Plus as a new program to try and reach out and attract more students into engineering disciplines, particularly women and First Nations Australians into those programs. We're yet to see whether that's going to have be particularly successful, but we're very committed to it. One thing that is vital, though, to all Australia's universities, as we seek to encourage young people in particular to consider higher education, tertiary education, that could be vocational training or higher education, we have to have the best possible facilities and the best locations to ensure we provide the best education delivered by our academics, our researchers, our teachers. And I think the Engineering Innovation Hub is an example of that, built during COVID, during the pandemic. So it's in a sense a building born of that challenge, so designed and redesigned to meet the needs of a post-pandemic Australia, and to have within it our engineering programs jointly with UNSW, but also our launchpad, our entrepreneurship programs, our incubators, our work with startup ventures. This is the new future for multidisciplinary integrated facilities that not only deliver outstanding world-class accredited engineering programs, but they provide so much more than that. And I think we're needing to think through all of these innovations. It's a long answer to a complicated question. I think we have a long way to go to address the skills shortage in this country, a long way to go. We could talk a lot about visa reform and other things, but it's important to have the conversation, and it's important to be prepared to be innovative, be creative, and maybe we'll make mistakes along the way, but let's try a few things in Australia. And to come back to my talk, most effectively, we can do that in collaboration. So the new alliances for universities, we haven't seen these initiatives in Australia before. 4 universities coming together to design an engineering program, not 4 different programs designed by 4 different engineering schools, but 4 universities coming together to do that. We're collaborating with UNSW, and that's an interesting bilateral relationship. We're about to announce a major new facility at Sydney Olympic Park in partnership with the University of Canberra. We're going to see more and deeper collaboration between universities, and that, I think, is part of the key to addressing the skill shortage that you're referring to. I can answer lots of questions.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I mean, it's certainly a conversation that we will need to continue to have in ATSE, and if we can make a contribution to this area, that's something that I think we could certainly aim for, and certainly we're planning an event early next year in honour of Robin King in terms of engineering education, and hopefully we'll make a contribution to continuing that sort of conversation. Now, can I invite further questions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
The cross-disciplinary approach, that some of this positions are. How does then the school of engineering plan to collaborate with non-engineering schools, non-science schools, then potentially have students come from different backgrounds, be absorbed into the industry? For example, the human factor design in our modern industry or infrastructure is a highly sought after skill, and there's hardly anyone available to do that. So I'm just wondering, how does that collaboration work?
So for our video audience, the question relates to STEM and how can that field be progressed in relation to non-engineering students?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I should have teased it out a little more if I'd had more time, because I think you raise a really good point that the collaboration, if you think about the complexity of the problems we face on this planet, we cannot attack those simply from a technological perspective. If we do, we will fail. We need to engage in the social sciences and the humanities to understand how people respond to changes in circumstance and how technology will impact upon them, and to ensure that technology actually is fit for purpose, and that we're undertaking explorations of the right forms of technology. You know, the debates around AI and the changes in computing technology, information technology in itself is a complex multidisciplinary pursuit. So you're absolutely right. We should talk about STEM in conjunction with the broader suite of humanities and social sciences and arts. I think one of the great things about Malcolm Chaikin was, as I referred to in the speech, that he was chair of NIDA for a decade and the Benevolent Society of New South Wales. He was interested in the arts and fostering the arts as an engineer and a scientist. And I think that's such an important. I have enjoyed my period associated with the Powerhouse as a museum for the applied arts and sciences. One of the greatest examples of the applied arts is where the fashion collection of the Powerhouse Museum intersects with engineering and materials design and everything else. So a very good point. And I do think hopefully we're seeing new models to enhance that form of collaboration. And I think the Marx Institute at Western Sydney University is a great example of that, bringing together disciplines to address really challenging problems and to realise it can't simply be a technological solution. I don't particularly like referring to STEAM. I think we need a different, it connotes a different idea, and I think we need a different way of talking about that collaboration, but it should be rich and it should be powerful. When I was fortunate to give an address at the National Press Club some years ago when I was chair of Universities Australia, and that was a speech about, in part, the importance of Commonwealth investment in R&D in Australia. But I did devote some of that speech to illustrating why it is so crucial not to leave the humanities out of this conversation. And I know the Academy of Humanities and others are deeply invested in this conversation with the Commonwealth about the contribution the humanities makes in so many ways. You know, our historians are so important to our future. We have to understand the past to understand the future. They influence all of our policymakers in government and beyond. So there's so many reasons why your comment is a very valid one. And we've got to find, again, new collaborative models to bring people together. So I look forward to that. I think universities for decades have been looking at different ways of doing that. I know I visited Madras IIT in India a few years ago, and they had a very traditional set of undergraduate engineering programs, but their postgraduate programs were all multidisciplinary. So once you went beyond a very basic engineering degree, the next step was going to be, well, now the real world is multidisciplinary and involved the engagement with the social sciences. So there are models we can look to. Another question here.
Another question.
Yes, thank you. I think that the examples you give of the Parramatta Hub, the university degrees, they're the end of the journey, if you like, before you go out and use your skills. But the beginning of the journey is in middle school. That's where the aspirational side comes in. And there was a Engineers Australia survey recently that made the partners of them conclusion that one of the main reasons women didn't go into engineering was because they didn't know what engineers did or what engineering was. And I've been 15 years trying to pattern that. And in my experience, you could ask the same question of course. They do not know what engineers do or what engineering is. You ask your graduate children. And I think one of the important problems is that engineering is not referenced in the curriculum. It is technologies. Now, there are historical reasons for that, but there are more references to engineers and engineering in the science curriculum than there is in the technology. And I think one of the things that we may be missing is that we're talking about engineers as already in the engineering industry. But I think of many more engineers, the skills that engineers are taught, the engineering design process, most important, it's purposeful design. Whereas at the education side, it tends to be muddied. There's no cycling. I tried to put that into the reform. It's nearly there, isn't it? And so in other countries, in the US, engineering design process is key. You don't have to talk about engineering, but you have to talk about a system for purposeful design. And I think that we should be maybe thinking about repositioning engineering for the 21st century. It's not just careers in engineering, it's actually the skill, the fundamental skill, designing for a purpose. And the process of design is what we do. We should be keeping that more right through. That's something that can be done at the middle school. And then it's great, but I think we should be more working on that.
So a very complex question and difficult for me to paraphrase for our audience. But in short, I think the question relates to how can school, middle school in particular, play a role in the demand side of the equation for engineering. I mean, you mentioned before that the principal challenge, if you like, in delivering more engineering graduates was to look at the demand side, and perhaps the school education is one factor in that demand side.
No, it's a very important observation about the extent to which engineering appears in the curriculum in schools, and that it's more apparent, I think you said, in the sciences than it is in the technology subjects, and whether we need to do more to engage in design for purpose in schools, because that will, in a sense, trick them into becoming engineers, because eventually they'll say, I am an engineer because I'm designing for purpose, and now if I can build it or get someone to help me build it or create it in some other way. Look, I agree, and I know at the moment Mark Scott is leading, the Vice-Chancellor at the University of Sydney is leading a review of the quality of teacher education in Australia, so we're looking forward to the outcome of that. That will have influence on the curriculum side as well as the development of our teachers, our initial teacher education training. There are lots of reasons why this is an important review and a timely one to influence the nature of the curriculum and the teaching in schools in Australia. And it's one of a number of issues, and I'm sure I agree with you. I think any way that we can enhance the understanding and the appreciation and the importance of engineering through the school years will make it, I think, a more attractive choice for many students coming into university, and designing for purpose is a wonderful way of framing it. So I hope you have success, and it's something we should promote, and we look forward to what comes out of Mark's review. Oh, Chaikin family.
I think, Chris, we had a question here from...
And then we had the Chaikin family.
Okay.
Perhaps
Well,
Katrina
Mate.
or Liz?
Either stage. We are continuously seeing drops in numbers of maths and especially with girls, because they can see that they can do better in the arts than they're looking at H arts. So we're constantly trying to encourage them to engineering, and quite a few of them do it, but as a general state observation in many teachers, there's a real problem with girls' marks in maths from the young level and not wanting to do physics, and the numbers are dropping. If we've got a new rigorous rate of B, very difficult, and the brightest are not doing it because they're turned off. So I'm wondering if you have a comment about that.
Well, I agree with you. I'm not sure there's an easy answer to any of that. You touch on a couple of points, though, which I think are important ones that we are having a dialogue about in New South Wales, and that is the unfortunate disincentives in our educational system that discourage young people from doing as much mathematics as they can and more what are seen as more difficult science subjects in year 12 because of a perception that that will impact their ATAR. And I know the New South Wales, I should acknowledge Annabelle Duncan here, my former colleague, former Vice-Chancellor at UNE. Annabelle and I have had many of these conversations with New South Wales Vice-Chancellors about how we can contribute to the reform of the HSC to take out those inherent disadvantages, to look at how other states can modify and change. So that's an active area of consideration. These are not easy to make. You make a change to year 12 and it's like a 4 to 5 year horizon because so many things are locked in for students in year 9 and 10 on their way through to year 12, that to make a change, you need to be, the changes last year to take apart, which I think was a very good change, the differentiation between vocational subjects in year 12 and academic subjects in year 12 to have a level playing field, I think was a very good move on the part of the New South Wales Vice-Chancellors Committee, accepted by the Minister on our recommendation. But that does give us an opportunity to build more technology-based programs in year 12. So there are some active steps. I know it's a challenge, but we've got these challenges everywhere. I was at a function in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam with graduates from our program with the University of Economics in Ho Chi Minh City, and I was talking to the graduates coming out of our business program, and so many of them were getting into blockchain, AI, startups, new enterprise development. This is a really challenging, attractive area to many students to move away from moving into the sciences and to have careers in science and technology, and finding different career paths that can be very lucrative and very fulfilling for them. And I think we need to find ways to ensure that the opportunity for careers in the sciences and engineering and mathematics is just as powerful. We need mathematics teachers teaching mathematics in high schools. Everyone says it. We have to find a way to get to that point as well. There's no easy answers to these things, as you know. Lovely to have a question from the Chaikin family. I think, Chris, did you have a question?
Yeah. Can I correct? Excellent. Oh. Kathy Foley, our National Chief Scientist, is doing a review of the national research priorities. That will set the agenda for maybe $2 billion a year of ARC funding for the next 3 or 4 years. I just wonder what you, as a key representative of the City of Western Sydney, and also a major upcoming regional university, would give us your sort of top couple or 3 priorities you should adopt today.
One thing I'll say, Chris, I'm glad Kathy's doing it. I think she'll do a good job. I think it's another one of these overdue reviews. So we've had national research priorities for some time. It's important to revisit them. The world moves on. So it's timely, particularly coming out of the pandemic and COVID, to have a look at what our national priorities are. There are a number of things that emerged in the last few years of sovereign risk to Australia that should influence our national research priorities. So there's a very important framing, I think, that Kathy will bring to the task. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and I go back to my comments in my speech, we have a state government in New South Wales, I'm sure it's true in other jurisdictions, which is at the moment appreciating the importance of long-term investment in R&D, commercialisation, knowledge economy, new jobs, new industry sectors, and future-proofing the economy against the volatility that we've seen in the last few years. So the other point, without being specific about priorities, I would say is we need to ensure, and I'm sure Kathy will, that there is a coordination of priorities. The national priority should be informed by state priorities. And we've seen that with RNA, for example, as a technology platform for new vaccine development in this country, now with Moderna moving to Melbourne. So you'll see a major RNA facility in Melbourne and you'll see one in New South Wales. That gives us a platform to ensure we have a national research priority that picks up that important state investment. All the phones are going off. This is obviously being picked up nationally as a timely contribution to the debate. So I'd like to see that coordination. There's been a lot of deep work done in New South Wales around advanced manufacturing, additive manufacturing, precision manufacturing, all of those elements to make the Bradfield Aerotropolis an attractive location for companies to relocate.
Of course, I mentioned that.
So the point is, I think that needs to be picked up by Kathy. The priorities should be building on what we have, our capability, but looking forward. And I think in New South Wales, those are the sorts of emergent strengths. And we have many, you know that, Chris, you set a lot of them up. Emergent strengths here that we need to build on.
Oh, yes. Thank you. And yes, a great presentation. Thank you. Barney, you did make reference to this particular point when you were talking and indicated that you might address it in the Q&A. And that was in relation to collaboration. Collaboration was a centerpiece in what you were saying. Effective collaboration or collaboration with purpose, you said. And you referred to a number of the alliances and the collaborative efforts, such as the New Alliance and the Engineering Hub and the Engineering Plus, which are, I'm sure will all work. But you did say that collaboration does not always work. In fact, there are many examples where it hasn't. And I wonder if, because we could all learn from examples that don't work, and perhaps learn more from that than anything else. I wonder if you could quote, perhaps changing the names to protect the innocent. A couple of instances where things didn't go right and it could have been done in a different way.
Yeah, the question relates to where collaboration, there are examples of collaboration at an institutional level that has failed or perhaps not lived up to the opportunities that those involved felt there was through deeper and more far-reaching collaboration. What are those examples? Can we learn from them? Without avoiding the question, the first thing I would say is I'm a great supporter of the CRC program in this country, and I have been for the more than 30 years we've had a CRC program, and to look at the enormous advances we have made in this country by virtue of having a cooperative research program started by the Hawke government and reviewed within an inch of its life repeatedly over the last 30 years, but surviving in that time. And I think it reflects the importance of long-term, 7-year refundable terms, collaboration with industry, CSIRO and universities. So at the research level with purpose, there are many examples of where it works and it works well. And I mentioned 2 in arid land management and water. CRC for water, the AJ Parker CRC for hydrometallurgy would be another great example. Composite materials. I think there's one technology out of composite materials that's actually brought more return to Australia than the entire investment in the CRC program in 30 years. So there are great examples of success. We should never forget that. And we should make sure, and I'm sure the Academy has a strong view on it, let's make sure we promote those schemes that bring strong new collaboration into addressing areas of concern. What I was referring to is where I think institutional partnerships, university mergers haven't worked in this country, and where the arguments have been powerful for those mergers. In South Australia, there's a conversation going on at the moment. The new Malinauskas government in South Australia is undertaking a review of should the South Australian universities form a state system, or should there be a merger between the University of South Australia and the University of Adelaide, and what would be merits of that? They want predicated on a top 100 university in South Australia. How do you get that from the existing institutions? Australia has attempted mergers over the years, and in many cases, in fact, in almost all cases, they have failed. The only merger that survives, and now I think is a great success, is the federation that came together in 1989 to form Western Sydney University, because it was a federation of colleges that almost fell apart after a decade because of the internecine warfare between the colleges that were merged, until the new Vice-Chancellor, Jan Reid, came in and did a wonderful job of bringing it together. Lessons we learn are really lessons around governance and senior management. If we want to bring universities together in the best interest of this country, because scale is important to sustainability, and we have universities that are perhaps smaller than we'd like them to be, and that means they're more subject to volatility and challenge, then we need to make sure the governance arrangements, the support from state governments, support from federal governments, and the senior management, the leadership of those universities are in alignment. Every example I could give you has been a failure of governance or a failure of leadership, and a failure in the part of the Commonwealth to give the resources necessary to bring about a merger. They do not happen cheaply. You know, systems alignment alone is expensive. The outcomes can be hugely valuable, but you've got to have that upfront investment in them, and we've failed to do that. The structural reform attempts by Commonwealth governments of varying persuasions have fallen short of institutional merger. And I think it's South Australia shows it's still a current issue for concern in this country. I don't think I offended anyone with that answer.
Thank you very much for that very good talk. I just wanted to raise this question that you had of learning from previous experiences. One of the things that we've been involved in Sydney was the technology part, which was connected by 3 universities, Sydney, New South Wales, and UPA, and then ANW. It might not have been as successful as it could have been, but it was quite successful, produced a very successful like last year. I think the last was $100 billion worth of outcome from that result. And so I just wonder how much, and I know you've obviously got this fantastic setup in Parramatta, I wonder how much value you're going to be able to extract from the lessons, and Professor Chris Cole Chris Bell was very much instrumental in that as well. So I wonder how much experience you can draw on from that.
Yeah, look, the question relates to the success of some technology precincts in Australia, some technology parks, and the ATSE, the Australian Technology Park, ATP at Redfern, I think you're referring to. And the success, which I agree, it's certainly by no means been a failure at all. It's certainly evolved over time and has had great successes, and Atlassian would be an example of that. One of the interesting conversations, and Annabelle and I were involved in this when Annabelle was on the New South Wales VCs, and also the Innovation and Productivity Council with me, was a conversation around what makes precincts successful. And not just look at Australian examples of precincts, whatever you mean by a precinct, but let's take it as a potential technology park concept. Whatever you mean by it, let's look at international exemplars of success. And what are the characteristics that we need to see in our precincts if we want Tech Central, which is one of the precincts that this current government is promoting strongly, with Atlassian as a core partner, with UTS and with the University of Sydney. If you look at what's happening at Randwick with UNSW, if you look at what is happening at Westmead, which is a huge precinct development there with ourselves, University of Sydney, Western Sydney LHD, and other partners. You look at what could happen in Liverpool, what could happen in Campbelltown, and so on, at a lesser level. We did some detailed work on this. I must say it was impressive work, I think, from the IPC to try and better understand all of the characteristics that take a technology park from being just a collection of buildings and interesting technologies being commercialised and companies potentially interacting to something that is a vibrant precinct where you've got all of the collaborative interplay that you think fosters next generation innovation. What's going to bring it about? And the IPC has produced some great reports on that. I know I've referred local government to those reports because a lot of it relies on the way the local government zones around precincts, into precincts. You know, we've got to be very careful when we develop technology zones that we don't embed all of the technology companies in one place. We need to have residential, commercial interplayed with the technology companies. We need to make them vibrant places for people to live, work and play. You need a cappuccino strip as much as you need an auditorium. You need to have people who come together. Sarkis is nodding because Holdmark is a great example of a company looking to develop precincts in Western Sydney. So I think we can learn a great deal from the work the IPC has done. And I think the current government in its precinct strategy is right on the threshold of potentially getting this right. But I think we've got to pay a lot of attention to those characteristics. And it's levels of government here. It's not just, you know, UTS, UNSW, UTS Sydney and Atlassian making Tech Central work. There's a lot more to making Tech Central work than that. So I think we can learn from the successes.
I think we've got time for one more question.
But I just wanted to follow up on that precinct. And, you know, and rightly so, it is about governance and it is about leadership, but it's also about permeability. And so, and precincts need to be permeable, as you say, to residents and to the industry. But I also think there's probably a broader lesson for universities and in fact all education institutions. They too need to be permeable to the community and to industry. And I think for too long, there's been a, you know, sort of schools that are behind fences, you know, at least for the last 30 years. You know, TAFE is not permeable in the way where people can just come walking in and out and the industry feels comfortable doing that. I chair the Sydney Council's Education and Precincts Committee. And one of the things that we've spent a lot of time talking about is because we've got industry, education and government on the committee, is how do we actually get people talking to each other? And what's the language and what's the way that people can interface and collaborate in very informal, but also, you know, important way for the future. So I just wanted to acknowledge that Western Sydney University is absolutely the best at it. And, you know, particularly around the way you've done your assets, you know, and so I want to acknowledge that. But is that something that you can see in 20 years' time is absolutely the way that all the universities are going to be?
The question is around picking up the permeability of the importance of permeability for successful technology precincts, but extrapolating that to the importance of permeability for universities wherever they're located, their campuses, either current campuses or new models of university campuses. And I absolutely agree with you. And I think all universities are working on making their campuses more permeable. We need to bring people in, the community into our campuses. In December, we'll open our new Bankstown campus. So that's a 32,000 square metre building, $400 million build in the heart of Bankstown. But it's been designed not to be this extraordinary building, but to be permeable to the community, whether it's for the shopping or whether it's the retail outlets or whether it's the childcare centre or the community facilities, to bring them into the building, to feel part of a university, not to be concerned about what does a university mean? Am I welcome in a university? Particularly in Canterbury Bankstown, where we're dealing with a region with low levels of educational attainment. So we want to see this as a great attractor to the community. So universities need to work on ways to make our campuses more permeable. And you do that in part by the way you interleave residential and commercial development within a campus. A campus shouldn't necessarily be at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or 6 o'clock in the afternoon closing down. We need to keep them alive. And then when we build new campuses in the heart of CBDs, then you do an enormous amount to support the retail outlets all around you, and you enliven and you make more secure those areas. And that comes from permeability. I know when we opened our Parramatta Square building in 2017, the first thing we noticed is how many school kids came in and used it all the time. They were coming in to be part of, and yes, we could have said, no, this is a university facility, but no, we wanted them there. Same thing with our Liverpool campus. Our library in our new Liverpool building is hosting an enormous number of students at the end of the day. The parents love to pick them up from the university where they've been studying in our library. Let's make our facilities open and attractive, because that's one of the ways, particularly in areas of challenge around educational attainment, that people will see that universities are places for them. You know, we still have 65% of our students first in family to go to university. Now, that's a great stat, but it means they're coming from a background where they don't quite know what university is about. So anything we can do while they're at school to give them access and opportunity to our campuses, I think will only enhance the demand side conversation we had earlier, enlivening about career opportunities. Yep. And I do think in 20 years, universities will look very different because of that.
Across the whole
Yeah, absolutely. No, not just Western Sydney. The others will catch up.
On that note, I think we've run out of time for questions. Before I'm Dick Kell to give a vote of thanks.
Barney, you can sit down if you like.
Well, that was an absolutely outstanding presentation. And just before I start to make a few comments on that last point and Barney's response to it, I was in it's the Shergold building, is that right? At Parramatta, which you guys will have all been there, but I urge everyone else to visit as a campus, university campus in the city. And there were tables in one of the large study areas, very large study areas of young people. And I thought, aha, I'll recruit a few engineers here. And went over and said, now, what level are you? And they were all high school certificate students, and they were sitting in tables of 6 or 7 debating various issues. And the 6 or 7 would be from 2 or 3 different schools. And they were, and I said, well, why do you come here? And they said, the atmosphere. It is so inspiring. So that was an actual case in point. Well, that was, as I say, an outstanding presentation. And I think we all appreciated the fact that Barney had gone to the trouble of doing some research on Malcolm Chaikin and said quite a bit about Malcolm, a visionary and such an innovative person and someone with such vast interests. I'm old enough to have been fortunate enough to have had some dinners with Malcolm, and he was a great companion at dinner and would always have friends from all around the world, and certainly a remarkable person. But I also liked and appreciated from the Academy's viewpoint tying Malcolm in with Robin King. And Robin was similarly a most gifted person. Those of us who attended Robin's funeral would have seen a brief video of Robin playing a spinet. He actually fabricated the spinet, which is not, didn't look like a very easy thing to do. I mean, it's a musical instrument, and there he was playing Mozart on something that he'd made himself. Quite a most remarkable person who we do miss. And Barney drew the parallel between those two most gifted people, and the way that inspiration can be drawn. The theme of, well, amongst several, but the one that struck me was collaboration and the need. I asked a question about it, the need for appropriate collaboration, or as Barney defined it, collaboration must have a purpose. And that seemed to me to be a very positive point. And it is the way I believe that Australia will, and our technology, our engineering, and our science will make progress in the very, very challenging world that we're in. I was very taken with your story of your Mavi and your Himalayas projects. I chair for Dean Willie, the Humanitarian Engineering Hub at the University of Sydney, and those two projects certainly fit within our area of interest. And I may well come back to someone on that and get a presentation on one of those projects, very large projects, and with absolutely the correct purpose and process to get to the local people and encourage them to get involved and take ownership. And so Western Sydney is such a diverse culture, as we know. It's a remarkable place, and one that I'm sure we're all very proud of the increasing achievements. And when you list the developments out there, the Nancy Bird Airport, the new powerhouse, for which Barney has had quite a lot to do with that, the light rail, and the massive developments, and the prediction that Parramatta will overtake central Sydney in a very short period of time. Quite remarkable, and it's just as well that there is a university out there which encompasses, both in geography and in culture, the incredible nature of Western Sydney. That will be the powerhouse of our future development, and leave behind the people who are lying around on Bondi Beach. And, but the challenge to the universities is to, Barney made the point, and industry is to collaborate, and he made the point that this has not always been well done, but then we should actually focus rather than the mistakes perhaps, or learn from them, but focus on what has succeeded, and there has been quite a lot of success. I think you've fielded the questions in the Q&A. Your responses had vitality and detail, and that was most impressive also. It has been the fortunate opportunity that the Academy has taken to choose only the most outstanding speakers for our Chaikin Oration. And the choice of Professor Barney was unanimous. And I have to say, it came initially from Robin, who and we were sitting around and saying, well, you know, we've had these outstanding speakers now, who is the next one? And Robin said, I know. And so that's why you're here. So I think that's worked very well. It was indeed a most powerful presentation with a grand vision. You certainly did teach us the way to get ahead of the curve. So I would ask you all to join with me in thanking Professor Barney presentation. Thank you very much. I think that's the end of the, I can close the end of the event. The next event I can tell you is on the 16th of November. We have the head of the Productivity Commission will be speaking, and I suggest, George, that we make a point of inviting all our new friends from Western Sydney along to that event for the lunch. Well, that we will take that invitation on notice and certainly come out to visit you out there. Yes, so thank you very much.